So I think we have to be very careful. It's a very exciting time in AI, but from a risk point of view and a cyber point of view, we can use the tools to combat the attacks, but also remember that the criminals are also using AI to increase and change the level of threats that we're seeing.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paola Lorenzo, Public Relations Manager here at Network Solutions. And today we're talking all things Cybersecurity Awareness Month with our Chief Information Security Officer, Tony Murphy. Tony, thank you so much for being with us today. We're so excited to have you. Our first question would be, what are the most common cybersecurity mistakes that small business owners make, and how can they avoid them?
Yeah, thanks, Paola. It's great to be here and great to provide some guidance and advice to everyone. Yeah, I think the first thing everyone really is basically thinking that they're immune to it or it won't happen to them because they're small. I think sometimes that's a common problem. And also, I think related to that is thinking it's somebody else's problem, right? And somebody else's responsibility within the organization. So how to avoid them? I think the best advice I can give is really get started, get a team together, like an information security team, a steering committee, choose some framework that is free basically and start working on it. So
Definitely. So speaking of checklists, what should a basic cybersecurity checklist look like for a small business, especially now as we're considering Cybersecurity Awareness Month?
yeah, it's a great question, Paola. I think the basic things, it's always human error that is the majority of issues. So start with training. There's a lot of really good companies like, before that have fairly cost-effective education training. So I think start with the education, and then I think just start looking really and do almost like an audit of where you feel you are and give yourself a grade. So like working the way up after education is typically the end point, right? Your laptop or your desktop, and there's, if you're a Microsoft shop, there's products called Defender, which is basic blocking and tackling, right? Like anti-phishing, anti-malware. And then as you move into the sort of network, and this is maybe where you need your IT team or a third party, is how are you protected from outside in? And that's like firewalls. And then probably the last thing is, and this is where a lot of the vulnerabilities and issues come from, it's actually your environment, right? Whether it's your hardware vulnerabilities or the software you're using. So keeping up to date with some, again, free websites that can tell you sort of what the vulnerabilities are and are you exposed, and then really just tackling those vulnerabilities. So a lot of it's around education, but also not just education on, not to click on a link and things that we're familiar with education, but also education around the applications and the environments you have and what vulnerabilities exist. Because nobody's really going to tell you that, hey, you've got a vulnerability until you actually go out and look at the websites and work with third parties to identify those risks.
Definitely. Do you have any recommendations on some of those affordable tools or practices that small businesses can use to boost their cyber defenses?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Paola. As I mentioned earlier, if you're a Microsoft shop with Office 365, Microsoft Defender comes included at a basic sort of level. But, even if you're a Google shop, there's also included tools. There's also, common ones like from Sophos or McAfee. There's a lot of sort of very, very sort of generic type ones from a desktop point of view. As you get into the sort of the firewalls and things like that, that's really where you're going to have to work with your third parties or your internal network teams to make sure that you've got those typically add-ons that sometimes comes with your circuit, like your internet service provider. So it gets, probably depends on your role in the organization. You probably will need some help in certain areas, but I would probably just start with who you're using currently, whether it's Microsoft, and sort of dive into their offerings first. It's probably the best option. Otherwise, you're going to have all these different vendors, and that increases your sort of footprint and therefore increases your risk. So I would start with what you have and explore with them what offerings they have.
AI is so prominent these days. So how has AI impacted cybersecurity efforts for SMBs, and what should they know?
Yeah, great question, Paola. I think AI has helped us and hurt us from a cyber point of view. The cyber criminals are using AI to speed up their capabilities. We in organizations are using AI to augment our work and to help us do our job, but that's also aiding the cyber criminals too. They're also using AI. So whether it's voice or chat or those phishing emails you get, the criminals are using AI to get those out to a wider audience in a faster time, right? And getting very sophisticated. But it's also helped us, a lot of the tools we can use can detect threats quicker. It can identify if it's an anomaly and maybe not really a threat. So the amount of people internally working on cyber can actually use the tools to help them. So that's actually been very, very beneficial. But it is a risk overall, I think, with privacy and data. So I think we have to be very careful that people don't just get ChatGPT and upload proprietary intellectual property to the networks and therefore expose a lot of confidential information to the models that the AI, the tools like ChatGPT are using. So I think we have to be very careful. It's a very exciting time in AI, but from a risk point of view and a cyber point of view, we can use the tools to combat the attacks, but also remember that the criminals are also using AI to increase and change the level of threats that we're seeing.
Okay, if a security breach were to happen, how should a small business respond to that? And what support should they be expecting as during such incidents?
Yeah, it sort of depends, Paola, on the strength of their internal teams. A lot of the small team members may have one or two people in IT, they may have nobody in IT. So it is a scary and tricky time. I think the best thing for everybody to do is to have some sort of simulation, and maybe, as I mentioned earlier, with those internal committees, you have to ask the question, what would you do? Who would you call? Right? So some almost like a little war room where you'd actually spin up something as a sort of a dry run or as a practice and say, well, what would we do? So having some practice is important. Having some help is important as well. What third parties are out there that you're currently working with that could actually help you in these times? And sometimes they will ask for something like retainer or something. Obviously, they're not going to do it for free, but you need some coverage from a third party point of view. And law enforcement is also an option. They don't really make it easy to find out how they can help you, but it's definitely something as part of that playbook and war room that I mentioned that you'd want to sort of figure out who do you contact and when you contact them. So that's there's a lot of sort of preparation, Paola, I feel, in preparing for such an event, but then also a playbook on what to do when the event happens, and you may need some third party help there. But there are some basic things, like I think, just isolating the threat. Maybe you have to shut down an environment for a period of time, but basically to stop the spread. So it depends on the type of attack that happens.
What are some of the emerging cybersecurity trends or technologies that small businesses should be aware of going into 2026?
Yeah, every company, it used to be every company was a technology company, and every technology company was a cloud company. Now every company is an AI company in some shape or form. So I think what you're going to see from a trends point of view is very AI driven. The offerings from every company, whether it's Microsoft, Google, that I mentioned earlier, on the applications that you use, or on the security tools that you buy as well, whether it's desktop protection or firewalls, the trend is very much around AI and what AI can do to help you find the threats, identify the threats basically, and eliminate it. So AI is actually not only going to help find, but it's going to help remediate the issues too. So that's the biggest trend that I'm seeing. So it's a combination really of cyber and AI.
Let's wrap it up to the very beginning. You started with the fact that small business owners and online entrepreneurs may feel they're too small of a target to worry about online security. What would you point to in order to dispel that notion?
Yeah, it all comes down to education, Paola, and the leadership and everybody in an organization. I think everybody just has to understand that it's not somebody else's problem, it's your problem, right? So whether you're in finance or IT or legal, everybody has to get involved. Everybody thinks they're too small, especially the small business ones, but a lot of the cyber criminals target you not only maybe for your own intellectual property, but for the customers and partners that you deal with. One of the biggest, encourage everybody not to just look at their own sort of four walls and what's inside, but who else are they partnering with and what is their risk profile like as well.
Absolutely. Got to protect yourself and your business. Amazing. Well, Tony, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. We're able to provide education for our small businesses through this, so we really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Paola.